Okay, so I'm Patrick Dunn, Project and Partnership Manager at UFI. If you could mute your microphone and hide your video for now, that would be great. What's going to happen is I will give a shortish presentation, and then I'll ask the panel to reveal themselves, to switch their video and audio back on again, and we will have a hopefully very interesting discussion. There are actually 4 projects, and I'll introduce them in a little bit. So let's see if I can actually run the presentation. Very good. Now, forgive me, I'm absolutely going back to the basics here, aren't I? What's the purpose of learning? The purpose of learning is change, isn't it? Because if you don't have a start point and an end point, and you don't change between the two, then you haven't learned anything, have you? That's my basic principle. Okay, so how do you create change? Think about it in your life. How do you create change? All right. You identify, presumably, what change is required. And out there in real life, you think about what experience will lead to that change, and you engage in that experience, okay? Now, if you take this as a sort of basic premise, you don't adopt this, I believe, somewhat old-fashioned view of life and view of learning and training, which starts by saying, what do people need to know? So what content shall we give them? Okay. It's not about that experience, it's about delivery, it's about content. And, you know, over many years, we kind of, at least I believe, we've kind of proven that that's not really a very good way of thinking about learning and training. So if you have a learning strategy, and by learning strategy, what I mean is an overall concept, a way of thinking about how you're going to bring together all of what you might call the learning stimulus, what's going to actually help people learn as a concept. It needs to be based on experience. That's my sort of basic position. That's my premise here. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about and illustrate by through a number of projects. It's just worth saying, though, that this whole kind of content versus experience issue, it's applied to a lot of technologies. For example, the original internet, the universal network, it was about kind of just dumping content out there, wasn't it? It was, you know, we said at the time, oh, isn't it great? We can chuck things at all sorts of people all over the world. And that's what the initial take-up of the internet was all about. And similarly, when e-learning first emerged, which I guess was the first widely proliferated form of learning technology, it was very much about delivery. Yeah. Now, if you just look at your phones right now, and I kind of hope you don't, because I want you to engage with this presentation, but if you looked at your phones now, you'll find a bit of content there, but primarily what you'll find are experiences, you know, games, quizzes, exercises. You can book tickets, banking apps. They're experiences, they're tools, right? So there's been a very significant change. But what we're talking about is technology. It's been widely acknowledged for a long time that learning and training isn't just about shouting at people, just telling them what to do. It's been about experience. Now, what we've got to concentrate on then is, or what we're going to concentrate on in this session is specifically, what is it that learning technology can do that other forms are perhaps less successful at? What can learning technology, what can technology offer? And you can speculate, you can say things like, well, you know, technology is really good at immersion in experiences. It's good at connecting people so they share experiences. You can say it's about individual focus or mass customization. You can customize without technology, but you can't do it on a mass scale as effectively. Performance support, and we will hear a bit about that in a minute. Or in other words, giving people little chunks of stuff while they're doing something. However, that's my presentation done. However, we need to hear from 4 of our projects, so because hopefully they'll illustrate these points. So I will stop sharing, and if our 4 contributors could reveal themselves, switch on their video, I'd be very grateful. Thank you. And Kate, your camera's quite low. Perhaps if you just tilted, there you go. There you go. And I will now, whoopsie daisy, I will now stop sharing if I can. Stop sharing. There we go. Right, hello. Gosh, it all worked as well. That's great. So basically, what I'd like you to start with, let's see if all your microphones are on. Yes, James, you need to switch your microphone on. What I'd like to do is each of you introduce yourself and say a little bit about who your learners are. How do you want them to change? How do you want them to be different at the end of your learning experience? And how does technology help? Now, forgive me, I'm just going to turn my chat on so I can see commentaries on the edge. Right, who should we start with? So, who are your learners? How do you want them to change? How technology is going to help? Kate, do you want to just kick off? Who are your learners?
Yeah, okay. My learners are prisoners, inmates in Northern Ireland prisons. So how do we want them to change? There's lots of ways we want them to change, but is that really going to happen? So it's about changing their mindset to learning and making it fun. A lot of them have been through the system. Their literacy and numeracy skills are poor. So it's about engaging them, changing the mindset towards learning. The technology is because we're using VR in the prison, so we're bringing the headset in. It's expensive piece of kit, so it's that investment in them, and also it's new. It brings it to life, and it's an escapism from your prison cell to go into this virtual reality. And they're really engaged with it, and the feedback has been very positive. So it gives them a little taste into learning without them actually thinking they're going into a classroom or anything like that. So from that point of view.
Thanks. Yeah, you started raising all sorts of issues that I want to ask you about, but I'll come to that.
Sorry.
No, it's inevitable, isn't it? Once you start talking, you kind of think, that's interesting, isn't it? I've got to press that one. You said a really interesting thing about escaping from. We don't really like talking about prisoners escaping, do we? But we'll talk about that in a minute. James, would you like to go next? Who are your learners? How do you want them to change? And how does your technology help?
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. So my name's James. I'm CEO and co-founder of Mobilise. But perhaps a more important role that I have is son to my mother. Now, my mum has MS, so I'm one of the 11 million people in the UK who are technically an unpaid carer. Although I've never used the phrase, I care about my mum, and that's the thing for me. So we're supporting all those people with a range of different caring responsibilities. And I guess if you think of it in terms of the change you asked for, Patrick, at the moment of diagnosis or an accident for a family member, whatever it might be, you're going to move from a position of some panic, actually, thinking about the impact that this is going to have on your life, what the expectations of your role are going to be. And we want to move people to a position of confidence, connectedness, and being in control. And if you think there are three kind of buckets of learning there. One is about the potential clinical need. Now, we don't actually support with that because there are professionals to do that. But the second bucket might be around navigating the system, the care system in particular, the financing of it, the many different professionals who will be coming through your home. And then the third bucket is the emotional element. We're learning how to manage a relationship with somebody which might be completely changed in a caring role. And the key thing that we need to do is manage that at scale. So really interested in what you said just a moment ago about mass customization and how technology can help with that.
Yeah, thank you very much. And again, I just want to, we'll come back to you. We're going to have way too much to talk about, aren't we? Anne, would you like to go next? Who are your learners? How do you want them to change? How does technology help? And when we were doing the little prep for this, you said, Patrick, I've got to challenge the premise of one of your questions. So do feel free at any point, any of you, to challenge me. Anne.
Well, thank you very much, Patrick. Yes, I'm not going to challenge the basic premise of what you were talking about in your presentation. I think that was absolutely spot on, and so much of what's been said already really echoes what we're trying to do as well. So we have a very diverse but broad range of learners that we're looking to appeal to and to help, and they are quite simply healthcare professionals. Right, we're all aware of the crisis that we have. It's been never away from our TV screens and newspapers for a very long time. So we are in a way contributing to or helping to solve that recruitment process problem that's in the NHS at the moment. So We already have a preparation course. There's a lot of hoops that people have to jump through. We're talking not just of people who are already in the country. We specialise really in helping people who are not native speakers of English. That's really our expertise. Some of them are already here. Some of them want to come here a great deal, and we need them, right? We certainly know that. So one of the hoops, once they've got their mandatory English exam, which we help them with, the next and final hurdle for them is a scenario-based exam, which they have to pass. It's an expensive exam, and if they fail, basically they lose their job. So it's very, very closely related to the vocation that they've chosen to work in. And it's a scenario-based exam where they have to role play, and for a non-native speaker in particular, that's difficult. So we've set ourselves quite a high bar here. Not only are we looking at the communication skill requirements from somebody who's not a native speaker of English, we're actually dealing with really difficult topics that anybody would find hard to talk about with a patient or with relatives. So we're going to focus on two things, really. We're going to create a very authentic, immersive learning experience, but we're not using VR, and if you ask me about that, I'll explain why. But we're doing a 3D simulation, and we're working closely with partners we've worked with before. The Glasgow School of Art has a special department dealing with simulation and visualization. They do a lot in the medical diagnostics field as well. So we're working with them to create those 3D environments. It's important to us that we can deliver as widely as possible, so it will still be possible to access this on a mobile phone without any further equipment. And crucially, I think that's one side of the thing, to create that experience for learners where they're walking into an environment and it appears to be very real. But the second part, which we are very, very focused on and passionate about, is really giving them some feedback. You know, yeah. It's all well we're walking into a real estate. What happens then? What happens if you make a mistake? What happens if you say the wrong thing, or if you come across with the wrong tone of voice? So how do you know if you've done that, right? So that's where I can perhaps explain a bit later how we're going to use AI and data analytics to solve that problem.
Fantastic, and I'm going to ask you a bit more about AI and analytics in a sec when we come back and talk about yours specifically. Julian, it's really interesting that the three we've heard from and how very different they are. So, Julian, how is yours different? Tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah, so our learners are people that want to get into the creative industries. At Next Gen Skills Academy, we work particularly with people that want to get into animation or VFX or computer games. And the people we are really trying to help are those that are disadvantaged in some way, either by geography, so they're not close to those centres of those industries, or perhaps they're from the underrepresented groups that find it much harder to get into those industries. How we want them to change is to acquire some of the skills that they need in work, particularly about working in a studio and pipeline of how assets move in a studio and are created and iterated and then put together to come up with a piece of work at the end of it. And a lot of the time we find employers say, those are the skills we want from young people, but they haven't had that first opportunity to learn those skills. So they're stuck in this kind of catch-22. So that's what we want them to learn. We want them to learn how to work together in a team, how to get those studio skills, and also how to apply for a job. And the way that we've worked with UFI VocTech on our project is to develop technology to enable what we call an online pop-up studio, which is like the professional tools that you'd get in a studio, but we call it a Fisher Price version. So it's like a studio with stabilizers. So young people can join it. They only have to join the one platform. They don't have to have multiple logins to use lots of different tools. And it just creates a very simple place where they can work together on an actual project. So what they're doing is absolutely not about learning the content we're giving them. They are just entering an experience, forming a team, getting professionals to work with them, to take them through a process to create something at the end of it. So the content is what they've created at the end of it. And that worked really successfully. We ran 2 boot camps as a trial with animation students, and they came up with 2 fantastic 30-second pieces of work, which the professionals that were on it and the people that worked in those studios were incredibly impressed with, which was really pleasing for everyone. And it enabled some of them to then go on and get jobs, which was fantastic.
Yeah, it's worth saying, I mean, forgive me if you said it, but it's worth saying that the people you're dealing with are very skilled to start with, aren't they? They're really good at what they do. They're very competent 3D modelers, if not animators. And that's not the deal, is it? That's not what you're dealing with. What you're dealing with is a professional context. So it's effectively, it's a brilliant use of network technology, isn't it? You know.
Yeah, absolutely. So that they had to submit some work to get onto the bootcamp in the first place. They had to have skills already. So it absolutely wasn't about teaching those things. No. They can be learned through the education system, through college or university, or that some of them were self-taught as well. So it didn't matter where they came from. They just had to be able to do it. And how they were helped with that, we had people to help them with real problems that they'd get in the studio and to overcome them. But it wasn't about teaching them things, it was just about resolving those issues as they came to me.
Yeah, great, thank you. So that was our round of little 90-second introductions. It was so interesting, it was great that you kept going. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to sort of just jump around. I'll talk to each project. Do feel free to chip in, and I might jump around anyway. I'll start with Kate and NIACRO, and forgive me for the slightly cheeky question. You're mainly dealing with health and safety. I mean, I've seen perfectly good health and safety where you just give them a brochure.
Yeah.
Why do they need fancy, expensive, clumsy headsets, all that kind of stuff? What do they need that for?
Yeah, well, the thing is that a lot of the guys we work with want to go into construction, so health and safety and warehousing. So health and safety is a major thing for them to get into employment. So health and safety is usually delivered by through PowerPoint, and it's like death through PowerPoint. So, of 2 days of health and safety, they start to disengage, and you can see then some of them don't come back. So it was just, this is sort of like to put a different slant on and to make it real, because they were actually going into a work placement, like a virtual reality work placement, and it's really quite like going on to a site, and a lot of the guys have never maybe worked on a building site. So it's given them an experience of going on the building site and hearing the different noises, looking at the different equipment that's on the site. So it gives them a real feel for it as well. So I think health and safety by virtue in itself isn't the most exciting training. So by using the VR, it does make it exciting, and they enjoy it, and also the learning seems to stick in their head. They really remember it all. So
it's really interesting. Sorry, Julian, you want to say something? No, sorry, I thought I had something to say. So it was really interesting what you said about mindset. Can you just talk a little bit more about that? So much of this seems to be sort of the emotional side, not just the fact that you're wandering around. Frankly, I mean, your virtual reality is incredible. It's really scary. You should see some of the moving side. But it's not just about wandering around a convincing environment, is it? Talk a bit about mindset.
Yeah, I think a lot of the guys that we work with have been disengaged from learning and sitting in a classroom. And again, it's their confidence, their self-esteem. They think that nobody really wants them, nobody give them a job. So it's just like investing that time into them to say, come on, let's have a go at this. And it's spending time, and like the VR headset, some of them have never used them before, would have access to them. So it's us bringing in this expensive bit of kit and spending time with them and engaging it, and really building a relationship with that person to get them engaged further with other training. So for the likes of in Northern Ireland, we have the CSR card, which is a construction card. That allows them on to work on building sites. So it's engaging them to come on to the site safety and getting a bit of confidence and self-esteem, and building up their CVs and disclosures as well to get them through the gate and into employment. So it's that investment in them, and it's changing the mindset to learning that we're not teachers as such, we're facilitators. So from that point of view, I think it's been really engaging to see them actually enjoy learning and don't realize that they've actually spent an hour learning health and safety.
Yeah, do you know what? I knew I'd abandoned my original structure. I just want to jump around a bit. Now, James, a very, very different solution, very different. Do you want to talk about mindset? Why is mindset? Why is the emotional bit so important to your project?
Yeah, isn't it interesting? While Kate was speaking there, I thought, oh yeah, there's a bit of commonality there.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we find is that emotional elements of the relationship are really, really key here. And there's just two points I'd like to draw out from what Kate's just described, if that'd be right. One is around I used to be a teacher, so I use the slightly pompous framing of transactional analysis here, and sometimes we can create relationships which are parent-child. I know the thing, I'm going to tell you what it is, and I think that's the very traditional teacher-student model. Although I am a teacher myself, and I'm sure there'll be others on the call who don't see that in their own practice. And actually, by building a community of carers, we create more acceptance of the information that's coming across. I, as a carer, I'm much more likely to take the advice if it's another carer saying to me, oh, I had exactly the same problem. This is what was helpful for me. Suddenly I've got a bit of social validation on that, and we've removed the hierarchy, which means that I'm more likely to engage it. The second point, and forgive me if I'm rambling, the second point, just around the emotional frame. One of the phrases we see in our community quite a lot, and it's the same phrase, comes up all the time. Hello, lovely people in my phone. And for carers who are a group who are so often isolated and lonely, and we know the impact that has on their health, to be able to identify a group actually of strangers, but strangers who you might be talking to about poo on the floor or your sex life being disrupted by something, that, you know, you actually have quite intimate relationships with a large number of complete strangers, which sounds counterintuitive. But once you've created an atmosphere of trust and safety, that mindset shifts from potential hostility and resilience to actually wanting to be exchanging value in terms of advice and emotional support as we go along. So I think that there's a real tally with the work that Kate's describing.
Thank you. So I just switched off the mic because there's a bit of noise going on behind me. So I want to come to Julian now. One of the themes that's emerging here is this idea of connection, emotional connection, community connection. One of the things that I found fascinating about your project is the way that it connects people who already have wonderful skills, but it's adding something extra. Let's talk about that for a bit. What does it add? Why does the network add something here?
Yeah, so as I said previously, and I was breaking lots of rules that these students would have been taught, by the way. They were taught about the discipline and sticking to the structure of what they were producing, and I think I blew my 90 seconds earlier completely. So apologies for that. But yeah, what it was about really was reducing those barriers, as I mentioned earlier. So if you want to get into the animation industry, say you live in the Shetland Islands, you might be a fantastic artist, your skills might be incredible, but how are you going to get that first job unless you are able to move to the place? And often it's about who you know rather than the skills you've got. So by enabling them to do this online through our platform, it meant that anyone could take part, and I think that was the biggest thing for us. It meant everyone was on the same level, no matter where they were, and able to enjoy that experience, which they couldn't get otherwise.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I'm going to do a bit of a swerve here, Anne. So one of the things that occurred to me about your project is that you're dealing with this extraordinary range of learners, aren't you? It's very diverse. How are they connected with each other? And you mentioned AI earlier on. How does that help? How does it make sure that they get what they need? Does it connect them to each other? Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, they will essentially be experiencing this on their own, right? Because that's how a lot of our learners learn. They're all spread all over the place, and they're not learning in a centre or in an environment where there's equipment and so on. we do have, we have a learning management system which will connect them in that sense as well. But what we'll be focusing on here really is the commonality of the experiences that they all have to face in their jobs. And it relates very much to what's just being talked about with the whole emotional side of things, and how that impacts on someone's confidence. And we're tackling head on some very difficult situations, like, discussing end of life care, discussing bad news, breaking bad news to a patient, or dealing with what you might call the non-compliant patient. Now, no matter what branch of the healthcare service you're working in, particularly with that latter example, you will come across difficult people that you have to deal with. And I know from experience, no matter how fluent you are in the language, if you're placed under stress and you've got somebody who's angry and difficult in front of you, then it does affect your ability to operate in another language. So we'll be giving people that sort of confidence to do that. Now, the way we're going to do that is we build the immersive experience first, but importantly, behind the scenes, we're using data analytics to capture everything that they say, right? And we'll be looking at particular ways of analyzing that, really quite sophisticated digital signal processing in terms of the stress and intonation, right? That's a very important part of how you come across, whether you come across as abrupt or uncaring or empathetic, so there are ways of actually capturing that. We've done quite a lot of work of that in the past. And also looking out for simple things like, if you like key phrases, so things that we'd expect people to say in this situation that would help ease and reduce the tension and just generally manage that situation better. So there's a lot of audio analysis going on in the background, which we will then be able eventually to train. I'm not saying we managed to do it all within the 4 or 5 months we're working on this project, but we will establish that framework and those parameters to be able to give the learner feedback after the event without human intervention. Right? And we are working on that as well. We will be running some trials with the NHS and getting them to listen to the feedback and say what would have worked, what wouldn't have worked. And so that training some with good examples, if you like, that our algorithms will eventually pick up on when we get enough data going through the system. So it's that experience plus feedback, and then the opportunity to try again.
Yeah, of course, which is critical in all forms of learning. Do you know, I'm fascinated where this conversation has gone. A, I completely broke my original structure, and B, just think about what we've been talking about. It's not about sort of heartless technology, is it? It's about connecting people. It's about the emotional bit. Thank you. We're really talking about experiences, aren't we? Really genuine, really authentic stuff, Let us move on. Do you know what, Anne? I've already given you a good go, but can you just say in one brief sentence, why not headsets? You mentioned why not? You mentioned you're not doing VR. You're doing very briefly, please, very briefly.
Okay, right. I'll be very brief. And I first of all, premise this by saying that I've every admiration for people who do VR, and I think it can be fantastic in some situations. We deal with quite a lot of people for whom a decent quality headset would be a barrier, and we're trying to remove barriers rather than create. So there's a cost element which whenever it comes into that, and we're dealing with individual learners very often where they wouldn't have access to that, normally speaking. Okay. And again, this is to some extent subjective, but there clearly is research to suggest that for some people, VR can be actually physically quite an unpleasant experience. Even I talked to some of my own developers who can only do their game with a VR headset for so long before they start to feel a little bit fuzzy or nauseous, perhaps. So yeah. we don't want to. There's enough barriers without having that. And as I say, I think it's all about feedback for us rather than. The VR creates the wonderful, realistic experience, or a virtual form of that. But we are focusing this project on how do we give the learner useful data back from that experience that then gives them more confidence to handle it the next time or to improve.
Thank you. Okay, this is where the swerve comes. I want to go to James. Yours is very different, isn't it? It's incredibly different, right? And forgive me if I'm using the wrong phrase, it's deliberately low tech, isn't it? It's not, it's not fancy, it's not all whiz bang and, incredibly scary building sites. I find those building sites absolutely terrifying. Anyway, James, why low tech? Why does it low tech? Why does it feel low tech? Why does it look low tech? What's that about?
Well, so we tend to use, we go to where carers already are. And the principle of that is that you've got enough on your plate figuring out how to administer new medicine, clear up the poo on the floor. There's loads going on, right? So we don't want to complicate that by expecting you to learn a new skill, which is how to access the content that we're providing. So we use Facebook groups, we use SMS, email. People love email, particularly in the age group that we're working, which is typically 45 to 65 years old, which is the majority of carers. That seems to be really effective. I noticed Jed asking a question about measuring engagement, and I think there's connected to your question, Patrick, because we want to bring all of the complexity to our end. So the user engagement should be as simple as possible, responding to an email, clicking a button in an email, whatever it might be, and we'll do the technology to analyze that. So a little example might be we do regular surveys. Instead of having to ask people to fill out all of their information at the same time, every time they respond, just by clicking in an email, we know which email that click has come from. We associate it with the record in our CRM, and we can then add that piece of data to broaden our understanding, not only of the situation of the carer there, but also to their levels of engagement. And then the output of that is that we can feed back to them a more customized piece of content or experience to them, which means that, you know, the technology they've interacted with hasn't been very complicated, but there is some sophisticated technology which is tailoring the response for them, and I think that's really key.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just looking at the chat, and Jed is asking a number. Thanks, Jed Keenan, is asking a number of interesting questions here. I wonder, Jed, yeah, you keep asking. Are we dealing with your questions? I was quite interested with your first one about how to use digital tools in comms with students to measure and report learner engagement. Digital tools engagement. Julian, learner engagement. How do you know anyone's bothered with this? You know, how do you assess whether your students are being engaged in what you're doing?
Well, I think the critical thing for us was we had 24 students over the 2 boot camps over 4 weeks full time. So it's a real commitment from them. And they all attended throughout, no dropouts at all. All of them got to the end of it. And that was the key factor for us. That was the key measure, how they were engaging with it.
Yeah.
They had to come to what we call stand-up sessions every day as a group to look at the work that had been produced the day before, and receive feedback, and then go away and work on it. If one of those bits had sort of fallen apart, other people would have to have gone and filled in, so everyone had some responsibility. I think that was the key thing for us. And we followed it up with a survey in the middle and at the end to get some richer feedback on what their thoughts were on it. But yeah, key measure for us was, did they stay on and did they contribute?
Yeah,
and they did.
Thanks. Do you know what? I was concerned that we wouldn't have enough to say, but we've hardly scratched the surface, have we? We've got 4 minutes to go. I'm getting really stressed that we're not going to fit everything in. Thanks, Shaz. That was a really interesting point. Yeah. Where are we going to go next? Oh, right. Okay. The big question: how do you know it works? How do you know that the experience you're giving to your learners? You don't give an experience, do you? You cultivate. You allow the learner to have an experience. Anyone want to say, we know why it works? Here's the data. Here's the evidence. How do we know it works? Yeah, go on, James.
So I think there's 2 things for us. One is carers love it, and if they're engaging at 2 o'clock in the morning with each other, that just action and activity on the platform is a really good proxy for whether or not carers find it helpful. I don't think they'd choose to do it if they didn't. But we've also embedded some impact measurement, and very briefly, we have a principle that we don't want to take information from somebody unless it is actually helpful to the user themselves. So we might start with asking the carer to rate themselves 1 to 5 against a number of criteria, you know, how connected they feel, how confident they are in their caring role, that kind of thing. And we reflect that back to them and say, right, well, what would you like to be your priority over the next couple of months? We then come back to them in a couple of months' time and ask them to do the same exercise. And we can then demonstrate to them, obviously it's jolly handy to us and our clients who are local authorities and our funders, but it's also hugely helpful to the carer to be able to say, look at the progress you've made on this dimension. And of course, the more you can demonstrate progress, the more the carer will feel that they're doing something of value and will come back.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I just want to highlight Sophie's comment in the chat about what would you, anyone who's listening to this, watching this, what would you stop doing, start doing, or continue doing as a result of listening to this breakout? It's a really, really good question. Any more questions on the right hand side? No, there aren't. Kate, I want to jump to you and just ask you the same question. How do you know it works? You know, you're in a very interesting situation where you're providing virtual worlds for prisoners. How do you know it makes any difference?
I think just from the feedback, because we're still sort of like developing it. We're going from like we're developing into actually a level 1 site safety qualification. So I think the level of engagement and the participation and the feedback definitely has given us the evidence that it's a good thing. And also there's no internet in the prison, there's no digital, there's no mobiles, there's nothing like that. So we're going into an environment of like there's no technology. And bringing the VR in is exciting, and it's given them a chance to get in and escape. But the feedback, and then they keep saying, Miss, can we do this again? Or what's next? So from that, I think the feedback has been that it is working. And there's always like, if we schedule them all in for it, there's, you know, if we put 10 in for it, there's 10 that comes, there's never a dropout. So that's been good, because sometimes if you schedule them in for something, they'll maybe just say, I can't be bothered coming out of the cell. So they're all attending, which is really good. So
hey, thanks so much. Sorry, anyone else want to chip in there? Anne, did you say something?
Well, sure. I mean, just we've got the advantage, I suppose, in terms of engagement of a situation where this is not an option. They've got to pass this. So there's a big driver in that sense. It's mandatory, it's expensive. So we also have the advantage of having, the last 2-3 years, built our own learning management system, so we can actually measure anything we want. We already do measure in quite granular detail what goes on in any activity. But I think it's really important to bring in the human element as well, you know, because this is essentially an experience about dealing with people better and handling that situation.
Sorry, Anne, just to interrupt. Yeah. It says we've got 6 or 7 seconds to go. I'd just like to thank you all. It's really fascinating, and it went in a completely different direction than I thought. So thank you. It was really fascinating. Now let's have a look. Yes, we're going to disappear in 4 or 5 seconds. So thank you, everyone. I hope that was very useful. Thank you.